Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy. On the hazardous weather graphic, we still have winter storm warnings going for St. Lawrence Island and the western Seward Peninsula, actually through Bering Strait, and then on up, including the northwest coast now, especially Kimberley, I believe, on up toward Point Hope and Cape Lisburne, and also Shishmaref there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And those winter storm warnings are out for tonight and through tomorrow in those areas. And then winter weather advisories here along and south of the Brooks Range from the Noatak Valley there into the Kobuk, Koyukuk Valley, and along the southeastern Brooks Range. That's out for tomorrow as well. Actually, in this portion, well, actually the entire stretch there is for tonight and tomorrow. And 40 to 55 mile an hour winds, reducing visibilities to less than a quarter mile or whiteout conditions at times here in the warning area. It'll be about less than 3/4 or half mile here with winds gusting 25 to 40 miles an hour in these zones. And moving on to satellite imagery, you can see a system here kind of pivoting. The low center seems to be dropping southeastward, and then a new wave right in here in the frontal boundary pushing moisture up and across the Fox Islands today in form of rain, not quite reaching, or almost to the Pribilofs actually, with the cloud shield into the western Alaska Peninsula. A lot of clouds over interior Alaska today as well as the Bering Sea, but you can see clearing showing up here over the Gulf of Alaska and the Northeast Pacific, and drier conditions today over the Panhandle with just showers around. And rolling this again, this system starting to pull northeastward here, and the clouds over the interior sort of really disorganized without any general motion, although the whole package is sort of drifting off to the east there. And up along the Arctic coast, upper level low and a trough passing by the main low center way up there toward Banks Island. That's producing, or actually pulling some colder air down and creating that Arctic boundary right here across the northern interior with quite a widespread area of light snow associated with it. And then there's a weak trough right through here that'll be kicking through south central Alaska tonight for possible rain or snow. Nothing significant, pretty light as it does. In fact, it's already kind of sitting on top of us now, but there's another one developing right back here. Just some areas of rain or snow, nothing too significant. Port Graham, for example, down on the southern Kenai Peninsula or south of Seldovia, they had about just under half an inch of rain during the daytime today, ending at 3 p.m. Other amounts were much lighter, like 1,500s at Homer. Otherwise, rain and snow showers scattered across the southeast coast, kind of diminishing here this afternoon. You see some breaks off the coast there and moving in, so kind of tapering off anywhere from a quarter to half an inch falling across the Panhandle in some areas there. Some areas had less, others had a little bit more. And this system spraying moisture into the Alaska Peninsula. And forecast for tonight, they'll continue northeastward, the low center coming north side of the Alaska Peninsula. And south to north flow, again, warmer air and rain pushing into Bristol Bay. Kind of iffy there for king salmon. You'll probably escape it due to the downsloping off the Aleutian Range. So not much here right on the lee side of the mountains there, but definitely increasing moisture in the winds. And this low center continues to slowly drift north and weaken, but big Arctic high up there, right about there, just north of Wrangel Island. And the gradient between that's keeping the pressure difference between the two centers, keeping a tight pressure gradient along the Brooks Range to the northwest coast and through the Bering Strait down towards St. Lawrence Island, keeping the winds quite gusty. Wind chills tonight 40 to 50 below zero in those areas. Drying out though along the Arctic coast as this area kind of shifts southeastward and east, but it's not going to make too much of a southward progression as we'll see in a little bit here. Weak trough finally kicks through southern Alaska. So look for some clearing later tonight, Cook Inlet down to Kodiak Island, and those showers probably ending here in the next few hours over Kodiak. Most of them been on the southwest side of the island. Another trough increases the shower and rain threat along the coast of the Panhandle later tonight, and we'll see for tomorrow. That low center slowly pulls northward, now southwest of Cape Newenham, and wave forming on the frontal boundary there to the south. So that's going to keep it on a northward track there. And rain, Kodiak Island up to the Kenai Peninsula, a mixture right through here, and then possibly snow or wet snow here into the Kuskokwim Valley. Not anything heavy at all by any means, maybe a little bit more out to the Kuskokwim Delta area. And this Arctic boundary is starting to shift back to the north a little bit now, and all the snow is on the along or to the north of that boundary, and we've got still a tight gradient across the Brooks Range there, so keeping those winter weather advisories going through tomorrow and maybe even into tomorrow night with the blowing snow and the reduced visibilities, as well as the low wind chill values, but improving there on the Arctic coast. The wind's lightening up and maybe some clearing skies from well, all the way on the west side there, but still quite windy from Point Lay southward into the Chukchi Sea, and drying out over the Copper River Basin. Just isolated showers, maybe a dry day for Cordova and Valdez. It will be for the northern Cook Inlet area in the Matanuska Valley, as well as the Susitna Valley. And then taking a look at Wednesday, that low actually pivots around and then pulls back and develops into a 970 millibar low. And that could probably bring gale force winds maybe into the Kodiak Island area. Definitely gales out along this and ahead of this front here into the Gulf of Alaska and the North Gulf Coast as rain and wind increase throughout the day along the outer coastline of the Panhandle, eventually even further inland. But this low center pulling back to the northwest, that'll result in a nice day here over the interior, that Arctic boundary weakening and shifting a little bit back to the north. That'll keep an area of snow from, well, actually St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait, western Seward Peninsula, and to the northwest coast. Could still see some areas of blowing and drifting snow, but really nothing too bad. You can see less gradient now, lighter winds, and this area from, say Anaktuvik Pass eastward, that's probably going to just be flurries. And then with weak low center here off the southwest coast, that's really not going to do much to the coastal areas. Just some isolated rain or snow showers. All the action back to the west here where the cold air continues to come southward across the Bering in toward the Aleutians. Be cold enough for snow showers over the Fox Islands. Another batch of snow moving into the Pribilofs, and then that tapers off as high pressure builds in over the western Aleutian areas. And the Arctic coast there, quite nice. VFR flying, possibly along the entire coastline as this moisture stays along and near the Brooks Range area. And moving on to low temperatures for tonight, anywhere from 15 to 25 below for the North Slope. Probably coldest out along the Arctic coast, and below zero right down toward the Bering Strait, with 6th the low tonight for Savunga, 17 for St. Paul, upper 20s and lower 30s for the Aleutians, and mostly in the mid to upper 20s south central Alaska, lower to mid 20s in the Tanana Valley, southwestward into the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys, and lower 30s for the Panhandle, and single numbers and teens on the east side. And then your highs for tomorrow, lower 40s here for all of the southeast coast, and near 40 out along the outer coastline here, like Seward. Valdez could approach 40, into the lower 40s for Kodiak, upper 30s, mid to upper 30s here, south central Alaska into the Susitna Valley, lower 30s up there in the greater Fairbanks area, also back toward Eagle, Northway, Tok, lower 30s, and mid 30s into the southwest interior, but cooler as you head northwest, just 19 at Nome, 15 the high in Gamble, staying below zero tomorrow along the North Slope and the Arctic coast. And then for your lows Wednesday morning, we've got mid to upper 20s for the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, western Alaska Peninsula, lower 30s for Bristol Bay, mid-teens for the Pribilofs, and mid-20s back up here into the Unalakleet area and over toward Kaltag, and teens for the Tanana Valley, still 15 to 20, 22, 3, 4 below zero up there on the North Slope and the Arctic coast, lower to mid-30s for the Panhandle. And for your high temperatures Wednesday afternoon, stays below zero again for the North Slope and the Arctic coast. And then by the time you get to the Brooks Range, you're into the teens, and south of the mountains there in the lower 20s, except over at Fort Yukon, high 15. Mid to upper 30s now, south central Alaska actually pushing near 40 down towards southern Cook Inlet, Homer, Seldovey, maybe even Kenai, and lower 30s back into the mid and upper Tanana Valley, but upper 20s farther to the east, 40 to 45 or so for the southeast coast, and lower to mid 30s for the Aleutians, upper 20s the Pribilofs, mid 20s St. Lawrence Island.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather. First graphic here showing lots of marginal VFR, Bering Sea and the Aleutians. IFR near the Alaska Peninsula, and a little bit here right up into Togiak Bay, Cape Newenham. More widespread area IFR up over the Koyukuk and Kobuk valleys across the Brooks Range of the North Slope, and also here across much of the Panhandle. And then for tomorrow afternoon, it improves a little bit there, going marginal VFR much of the southeast coast. That'll extend across the Gulf into the North Gulf Coast. And IFR here, Kuskokwim Valley, right on down to the Delta. And another band there in northern Seward Peninsula right across the Selawik Valley, and expanding as it gets to the Koyukuk Valley on up across the Brooks Range, but VFR up there along the Arctic coast. And for Wednesday morning, IFR hanging tough here along the southwest coast, but not as far inland as it had been. In fact, getting replaced with VFR there over the Kuskokwim Valley. And IFR back to the Pribilofs, a little bit there southern Kodiak Island, also up here over the eastern interior a little bit. VFR over the eastern Copper River Basin, marginal VFR, much of the Panhandle except down toward Prince of Wales Island. And then for the afternoon, back to the IFR here over much of the southeast coast of the band, right up along the North Gulf Coast, back down to Kodiak Island. Another zone here, St. Lawrence Island, right down along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coastline. Marginal VFR pushing inland a little ways, and also another batch up here to the northwest from the Seward Peninsula into the western Brooks Range. Not too bad over the interior, and it stays VFR along the Arctic coast and marginal Aleutians and Bering Sea. IFR for both Adigan and Anatuvik passes tomorrow, with Lake Clark and Merrill, call it mostly marginal, and rainy, same forecast, occasionally marginal, and windy, kind of trending either way, but marginal VFR at times, and there'll be VFR at other times. And then for Isabel, IFR becoming marginal, but in Tasta, VFR and then some moisture sneaking in may bring it down to the marginal VFR threshold, and Tanita, marginal VFR becoming VFR. And for Portage, same forecast, same trend there. Lower conditions in the morning, VFR into the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, IFR slowly improving maybe to marginal VFR. And the freezing level is not much to look at here. The surface, a little farther south in the Bering Sea now, actually south of the Pribilofs tomorrow morning. Northern Bristol Bay, still up along the North Gulf Coast and over toward the eastern border of the Panhandle. 2,000 feet there, southern Dixon entrance, and that's about it. Icing-wise, scattered areas of light mixed icing here for the southeast coast, maybe a little more widespread, but even that's not going to be much up to the north. Same thing here over the southwest interior, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, scattered areas of icing potential, I'll call it here in these zones. And this one a little more potent, but not much, no considerable, just isolated considerable amount below about 4,000 feet with that Arctic boundary up there in the moisture along the Brooks Range. And for the jet stream here, high pressure trying to rebound a little bit here into the Gulf of Alaska, and strong jet here, pretty strong trough rotating around the bottom of this Bering Sea low, 160 knot jet, kind of diverges here, southerlies at 40s. Weak trough that'll be coming through tonight here, shifting off to the east, and northwesterlies about 40 knots, eastern Beaufort Sea coast with that cold upper low pulling off to the east now. And checking out the 9,000 foot wind flow chart, we've got the main low here just north of the Alaska Peninsula, a weaker version up there near St. Lawrence Island, and southerlies to southeasterlies 25 to 35 knots here, Kodiak Island and northeast Bristol Bay and southern Kuskokwim Valley. 25 knots up around Denali, but lighter, 15 to 20 knots to the north, and 15 knots Copper River Basin. Northwesterlies up to 40 knots here across the Fox Islands, And otherwise 25 to 35 Aleutians, lighter toward Shimya. 3,000-foot winds showing the same pattern here more or less. Low pressure western Bristol Bay, southeast 25 to 35 knots, lighter eastern interior. Northeasterly is pretty good there. 40 to 50 knots here from the western Brooks Range in toward the Bering Strait. Northwest 25 to 30 knot winds here from the Pribilofs down across the Fox Islands, but much lighter out toward that ridge axis, and the Panhandle 10 to 20 knots. Icing, or turbulence, 3 zones here. Eastern Aleutians, southwest interior Alaska Peninsula, Brooks Range, northwest coast, the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes. Okay. Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
And the foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Ends. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator. Okay. So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska. and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower.
Yeah.
It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now, the real important way to make this work is you have to have 2 satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference, and you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long-range view that's looking top-down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at Dehne, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis, and it's growing again. The sea ice advancing southward. Temperatures just above zero with strong northerly winds, 30 to 50 miles an hour, just pushing that through the Bering Strait. And actually some probably starting to form in here as well. And that's going to continue to increase a little bit, at least for the next couple of days, as the cold air stays in, but those winds are going to start dropping off, and that may actually lead to more of an ice formation kind of period there with the lighter winds, and then the sea surface temperatures below zero or below freezing. Moving on to coastal water forecasts, westerly winds mostly 25 knots here along the coast, seas 16 to 17 feet, a little lighter up north. South 25 again for northern Lynn Canal, but southwest 15 Stevens Passage and south 15 for Clarence Strait, and the other inside channels, probably some direction other than that. And for the Wednesday outlook, gales, good gales coming into the north coast there, east-southeast 45 knots, seas 18 feet, 40 knot winds on the south coast, and gales moving into Clarence Strait in the afternoon, 35 knots, 25 gusts 40. About the same there for Stevens Passage, only 10 knots in the forecast for Lynn Canal. Prince William Sound, east 15 tomorrow, southwest 20 for the North Gulf Coast, seas 10 to 12 feet, south 20 for the Barren Islands, and 25 knot winds from the southeast, Kamishak Bay, southern Cook Inlet, northeast at 20, northeast 15 there north of the Forelands. And then for Thursday, big increase in the winds here, north 30 knots, northern Cook Inlet, and full gales here south of the Forelands, right near Kamishak Bay, 40 to 45 knots. Storm warnings here, North Gulf Coast into the Barren Islands, easterlies of that big storm coming up right about in this area here, just east of Kodiak Island. So east 50 knots, seas 20 to 23 feet, and gales developing over Prince William Sound into the afternoon at 35 knots with 8-foot seas. And for Bristol Bay, southeast 30 knots, Kodiak Island, south to southeast 20 to 25, and 30 knot winds. Sitkinak to Cape Sarachef from the south, and then northwesterly gales on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. And then those will drop off to 20 and turn more westerly on Wednesday. Otherwise, west 25 knots, Cape Sarachef to Castle Cape, northwest 30 on up towards Sitkinak, and then northeast 45 knots there for the east side of Kodiak Island, and coming up to 35 knots out of the northeast for Shelikof Strait. And for tomorrow for the Fox Islands, northwest 30 to maybe 40 knots there, and seas running 10 to 18 feet. Northwest 30 for the central Aleutians, northwest or west-northwest 20 for the western zones. And for Wednesday, even lighter winds out there towards Shemiev west of Kiska Island, north 15. And then Amchitka to Adak, northwest 20 and north to northwest 20 for Adak and Atka. Seas down to 8 to 9 feet. And small craft advisories pretty much hold here for the eastern Aleutian zones for west-northwest at 20 to 25 knots. Southwest coast tomorrow, south of Nunivak Island, small craft advisories, northeast 25 knots. Drop off to 20 knots here around the Pribilofs. Back up to north 25 for St. Matthew Island, and then 20 to 30 knot winds here from the Nunivak Island area with the 30 knot winds St. Lawrence Island into the Bering Strait. And then the outlook for Wednesday, northerlies 30 knots continue there for St. Lawrence Island, east 30, north of Nunivak Island, south 20, south of Nunivak Island with north turning northwest at 25 for the Pribilofs. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, pretty light winds tomorrow, 10 to 15 knots, 15 knot winds all the way over till you head down toward Point Lay, or probably Wainwright there south start picking up brisk wind advisories, gales from Cape Thompson, or from Cape Beaufort all the way down to Wales with north winds 40 knots in that zone. And then those pull back to 25 knots from the northeast there from Wales up to Cape Thompson. And gales continue here up to Cape Beaufort, and then brisk wind advisories, good stiff northeast wind there on the west side, and east-northeast 15 to 20 for the eastern central coast. And for tonight again, this system keeping a widespread area of snow and winter storm warnings with low wind chills 40 to 50 below in the windiest areas there, and a few more inches of snow. Drier here across southern Alaska. This weak trough kicks through and really doesn't do much, and another system bringing rain and an increase in the winds there into the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay area, and more showers approach the Panhandle. And then tomorrow that low lifts northward, and this is what it shapes up. It weakens here off the southwest coast. The new one comes up, and that's a big storm that will affect the Gulf of Alaska, Kodiak, and the North Gulf Coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.